Hi, and welcome to my channel. Here we focus on simple, meaningful, and enjoyable content that fits into your everyday life. If you appreciate calm, quality videos, feel free to subscribe and stay a while.
I remember the exact moment I noticed something was off. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no mysterious phone call in the middle of the night. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, and my wife was standing at the kitchen counter reading something on her phone. She was smiling. Not the kind of smile you give when you see a funny meme, the kind you try to hide. She heard me come in from the garage and the smile disappeared so fast it was like she flipped a switch. "Morning," she said, not looking up. "Morning," I said back. That was it. That was the whole conversation. We'd been married 19 years. Her name was Elise. She had dark eyes and this laugh that used to stop me cold when we were in our 20s. The kind of laugh that made everyone in the room turn around. We met at a continuing education 9 class. I was taking a business accounting course, and she was there for graphic design. I showed up with the wrong textbook. She laughed at me. 3 months later, we were inseparable. I'm a firefighter. Have been for 22 years. I work 24-hour shifts, and then I'm off for 48, which sounds like a lot of time at home. But it doesn't feel that way when you're running calls all night and coming home half dead. Elise used to say she married a man who was always tired or always gone. She said it like a joke. Eventually, she stopped saying it like a joke. We had 2 kids. Our son was 17 at the time. Our daughter was 14. Good kids. Busy kids. The kind of teenagers who fill a house with noise and then leave it completely silent when they go to school. The smile on her phone, that's what I kept coming back to. I told myself I was being paranoid. Elise worked as a senior designer at a marketing firm downtown. She'd been there 6 years. She liked her job, liked her team, came home most nights talking about campaigns and deadlines and a coworker who microwaved fish in the break room. Normal stuff. I had no reason to question any of it. But the smile. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't in years. Small things. Her gym bag was suddenly going with her 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She'd always been casual about the gym before. She started being more careful with her phone, never leaving it on the counter, always face down, always nearby. One evening, I walked past the bedroom and she was on a call. And she said, "I'll talk to you later," and hung up faster than felt natural. When I asked who it was, she said it was her friend Danny from college. Normal enough. Except she didn't look at me when she said it. I want to be clear, I am not a man who snoops. I never went through her phone. Never checked her email. We'd built 19 years on trust, and I wasn't willing to throw that out based on a feeling. But the feeling kept growing. The thing that broke it open wasn't what I expected. I was off duty on a Wednesday afternoon in November, and I stopped by the firm's building to drop off her lunch. She'd left it on the counter, and I figured I'd save her the trouble. I'd been there a dozen times over the years. The receptionist knew my name. I texted Elise from the lobby to let her know I was there, and she didn't respond, so I figured I'd just leave the bag at the front desk. I was walking out when I saw her through the glass wall of a conference room. She was in there with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, good-looking in an easy way. The kind of guy who looks like he's been comfortable in every room he's ever entered. They were standing close. Not inappropriately close. Not doing anything wrong. But she was touching his arm the way you touch someone when you want them to know they have your full attention. And she was smiling. And that smile. I left the lunch bag with the receptionist and walked out. I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 20 minutes. My hands were on the steering wheel and I wasn't moving. I told myself it was nothing. People touch coworkers' arms. People smile. I've been a firefighter long enough to know that the brain will find catastrophe in anything when it's looking for it. I drove home. Made dinner. A date with the kids. Elise came home at 7:30. Apologized for missing lunch. Said she'd been slammed all afternoon. I said no worries. I didn't sleep that night. I found out who he was. The way you find out everything now. Online. His name was Preston. He joined the firm about 8 months ago as a creative director, which meant he was Elise's direct supervisor. I stared at his photo on the company website for a long time. 42 years old. Divorced. Moved to the city from somewhere on the West Coast. 8 months ago. That was roughly when Elise's moods had started shifting. When she'd started being more critical of small things, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the way I told a story at dinner, the way I'd been coasting in my career, which was a word she'd started using about me like a diagnosis. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Marriages go through seasons, I knew that. I thought about it a lot now. I needed to know. I didn't want a part of me would have been fine living the rest of my life with just a suspicion rather than a fact, but a larger part of me had spent 2 decades running into burning buildings, and I was not built to stand outside something and wonder. I took a day off the following week and parked down the street from her office just before noon. I felt ridiculous. I felt like a man in a bad movie about a man in a bad marriage. I sat there for an hour and a half eating a gas station sandwich and feeling sorry for myself, and I was 10 minutes from giving up and going home when I saw them walk out together. They went to a restaurant 2 blocks away, not a dive. A real restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. I sat in my truck and felt the whole weight of 19 years shift. When I got home, I went down to the basement and I sat in the dark for a while. Our daughter had soccer practice. Our son was at a friend's house. The house was quiet. I'm not going to tell you I didn't cry. I did. I'm 51 years old and I've seen things in my career that will never leave me. And I cried in my basement over a restaurant I didn't go into. I gave it 3 days. I needed to be sure. The Tuesday after, I asked my lieutenant for a personal day, something I'd never done before in 22 years, which is not a small thing in a firehouse. I drove to a spot where I could see the parking garage exit from her office. At 4:15, her car and his car left within 2 minutes of each other. I followed at a distance. They went to a hotel about 12 miles out. Not a roadside motel, a nice hotel, the kind with a circular driveway and a valet. She parked. He parked. They walked in together. I took a photo from across the street just so I couldn't talk myself out of it later. Then I drove home. I need to tell you something about what happened next because I think this part matters. I didn't explode. I didn't go back to the hotel. I didn't call her screaming. I called my sister, who is the smartest person I know and the only person I would have trusted with this. I told her what I'd seen. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, "What do you need from me right now?" I said, "I need you to help me not make a decision I'll regret." She said, "Okay, come over." I spent that night at my sister's house. I didn't tell Elise where I was. I texted her that I'd gotten roped into helping a buddy with something and would be back in the morning. She responded with a thumbs up. I don't know why that hurt as much as it did, but it did. Over the next week, I did 3 things. I called a lawyer, a woman my lieutenant's wife had used during their divorce, not a bulldozer type, but someone who was honest and methodical. I met with her for 2 hours and laid everything out. She told me what I needed and what I didn't. The second thing I did was talk to our daughter's school counselor, not about the specifics, but about what to expect from teenagers when a family goes through something hard. I wanted to be ahead of it. I wanted to be able to answer them when the time came instead of figuring it out in real time. The third thing I did was call Elise's HR department. Not to blow anything up. I want to be clear about that. I identified myself and asked to speak with someone confidentially about a workplace situation. An HR director named Felicity called me back that afternoon. I told her that I had documentation indicating that the company's creative director was having a personal relationship with the direct report. I didn't use names at first. She went quiet, and then she said, "Is this about Preston Albright?" She already knew. Or suspected. Apparently there had been other concerns. I confirmed. I forwarded the photo. I told her I wasn't looking to cause chaos. I was simply making the company aware of something that had legal and ethical implications for them. She thanked me and said she'd be in touch. 3 days later, Preston was placed on administrative leave. Elise came home that evening different. She wasn't quiet different. She was sharp different. The way a wire gets when you pull it too tight. She wanted to know if I'd said something. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. She went to the bedroom and closed the door. That Friday morning, I asked my kids to come to the kitchen before school. I told them I needed to talk to them about something hard and that nothing that was about to happen was their fault, and that I was going to be honest with them because they were old enough to deserve that. My son looked at the table. My daughter looked at me. I told them their mom and I were going to be going through some changes. My son said, "Is this about her and the guy from work?" I looked at him. He shrugged. "She talks on the phone at night sometimes, when she thinks we're asleep." 14 years of working fires and my son sitting in my own kitchen was the one who knocked the wind out of me. The divorce papers were served to Elise at the office that same day. Her firm had 3 conference rooms and a glass-walled lobby, and I'd made sure her assistant knew in advance, which meant there was an audience. That was intentional. I want to be honest about that. She'd been walking through our house for 8 months like everything was fine, and I wanted there to be at least one moment where she had to face something she couldn't arrange. She called me from her car, barely out of the parking lot. The first thing she said was my name. The second thing she said was an accusation. I let her finish. Then I said, "Elise, I followed you to the hotel." Silence. "I have a photo," I said. "I've already given it to your HR department, and I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm not calling to fight. I'm calling to tell you that we're done, and that I'd like us to be adults about what comes next for the kids." She said it was a mistake. I said mistakes are things that happened once. She said Preston had pursued her and she hadn't known how to stop it. I said I wasn't interested in his biography. She said she still loved me. I said I believed her and that it didn't change anything. She hung up. I went back to work. Preston did not take the administrative leave quietly. He sent Elise a number of messages trying to coordinate a story, which she screenshot and showed me later when she was trying to demonstrate that he'd manipulated her. I looked at the screenshots. They did show someone trying to coordinate a story. They also showed someone who didn't particularly seem to care what happened to Elise as long as his own situation resolved. I didn't say that out loud. She was going to figure it out without my help. Preston was terminated about 3 weeks after the administrative leave. The firm cited a conflict of interest and a violation of their supervisory relationship policy. He contested it for a while and then apparently didn't. The last I heard, he'd gone back to the West Coast. What I hadn't expected was my own department. Firehouses are not places where privacy exists. Somebody's buddy heard something from somebody's wife, and within a week half my shift knew what had happened. I want to tell you it was supportive. Some of it was. But some of it was the other thing too. The kind of rough-sided sympathy that sometimes feels more like entertainment. The ribbing, the jokes that aren't quite jokes. I went through about 3 weeks of that before my captain sat me down and asked me directly if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He said, "You've been a lieutenant for 8 years, and you've never taken a personal day before last month. Your fine is your fine, which means you're not." I told him I was working on it. He said that was acceptable, and that his door was open, and that was the end of the conversation. It was one of the better conversations I'd had in months. The divorce took 7 months. Elise and I were cordial in the way that people are when they've known each other for 2 decades and are learning to become strangers to each other. We didn't have a business or a complicated asset structure. We had a house, 2 cars, 2 kids, and a retirement account. We worked out custody before we were ever in front of a judge. My daughter cried. My son got very quiet in a way that concerned me more than the crying. I started taking my son to breakfast on Sundays. Just the 2 of us, nothing formal. We went to the same diner every week and ordered the same things and talked about whatever he wanted to talk about. Football, mostly. Sometimes cars. Once or twice something real. It helped. At least it seemed to. About 8 months after the divorce was final, I was at a fundraiser for a local burn unit. Our station had raised some money and we were doing the handoff. There was a woman there who introduced herself as the hospital's foundation director. Her name was Margot. She was maybe 45, composed in that way that reads as confidence rather than coldness, and when she shook my hand, she made actual eye contact, which sounds like a small thing, but it had been a while since someone's full attention had landed on me like that. We talked for about 20 minutes, mostly about the fundraiser. She was good at her job in a visible way. I didn't ask for her number. I wasn't ready, but I thought about her on the drive home. My sister, who's known me for 51 years and has opinions about everything, told me sometime around month 10 post-divorce that I needed to actually live my life again and not just describe it in the past tense. She said this over the phone and then waited, which is her version of punctuation. I said I'd been talking to someone at the burn unit fundraiser. She said, "It's been 10 months, call her." I did not call Margot for another 6 weeks. When I finally did, she answered on the second ring and said, "I was wondering if you were going to." I said, "How did you know I had your number?" She said, "Your station's administrative coordinator and I play in the same tennis league." I said, "I'm going to need a moment." She laughed. It wasn't the same as Elise's laugh. Nothing was going to be the same as Elise's laugh, but it was real, and it was warm, and I felt it somewhere behind my sternum. We went to dinner that Friday. Nothing fancy, a good Italian place near the hospital that she knew and I'd driven past 100 times without going in. We talked for 3 hours. She'd been divorced herself, 6 years ago, no kids, amicable in the exhausting way divorces are when two people are trying very hard to be better than their circumstances. She'd spent a few years rebuilding things she'd let go during the marriage. Friendships, hobbies, the sense that her life was actually hers. I understood that more than I expected to. I told her a version of what had happened with Elise. Not the whole thing. Not that night, just enough for her to understand where I was coming from. She listened without trying to solve it, which is rarer than it should be. I walked her to her car. She looked at me and said, "I'd like to do this again." I said I would too. Here's what I need to tell you about the next part, because I think people expect a certain kind of story after a betrayal. They expect the triumphant second act. The man who gets cheated on finds someone spectacular, and his ex watches from a distance and regrets everything. Maybe that's satisfying. Maybe that's even sometimes true. My story is quieter than that. Elise and I crossed paths at our daughter's school musical about 4 months after my first dinner with Margot. She looked tired in a way she hadn't before. She'd left the firm and taken a position at a smaller agency. Less money, longer hours. Preston, as far as I could tell, was completely out of the picture. She'd mentioned his name twice in our parallel parenting conversations, and both times she'd said it like she was biting into something sour. She asked me after the musical if I was seeing someone. I told her yes. She nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said, "Is she good to you?" I said yes. She said, "Good." And she meant it, I think. Or she was trying to. There are 19 years of history between us, and 2 kids who are going to be in both of our lives for the rest of them. And the anger had to soften in somewhere. It didn't soften into friendship, not really, but it softened into something that doesn't have a name. This careful, low-key regard for someone whose choices broke something important, and who is now living with the weight of that every day. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her carry that weight. I want to be clear about that. I had expected to. I didn't. What I felt mostly was free. My son graduated high school 2 years after the divorce. I sat in the bleachers with my sister and my daughter, and Elise sat 3 rows ahead with her parents, and when they called my son's name, we both stood up at the same moment, and I heard her say his name out loud, just his name, the way you do when you can't contain it. And it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It just felt like the 2 of us, in the same moment, being proud of the same kid. That was enough. Margot and I took our time. There was no rush, no pressure, no sense that either of us was trying to fill something instead of find something. We traveled a little. She came to a few of my department's events and was good at them in the quiet way. Not performing, just present. My kids liked her, which I had not taken for granted and did not take lightly. About 2 years after that first dinner, on a Sunday morning at the same diner where I took my son every week, I asked her to marry me. No ring, no production. I just told her that I'd been trying to find the right moment for a while and had finally realized the right moment was any moment I was with her. She was quiet long enough that I genuinely thought she was going to say no. Then she said, "I was starting to wonder if you'd ever get there." I said, "I'm a slow starter." She said, "I know, I've been watching. My son was my best man. My daughter did a reading. Elise sent a card to the house, handwritten, short, genuine. I've kept it, not because I'm sentimental about her, but because I think it said something about who she was trying to become, and I respected the effort, even if I couldn't tell her so. There's a line from the vows Margot wrote. She wrote her own, which I should have expected and didn't. That I've thought about a lot since. She said, "I know you know what it costs to trust someone. I'm asking you to spend that anyway." I'd spent 22 years running toward things that were burning. Trusting Elise had cost me. Trusting again cost something too. But some things are worth what they cost. On our wedding night, after everyone had gone home and we were sitting on the back porch of the rental house in the dark, Margot leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "I love the way you show up for people. I've never known anyone who just keeps showing up." I didn't say anything. I just put my arm around her. I kept showing up. That was the whole story, really. That's the part I'd finally gotten right. I've thought a lot about why I didn't blow up the night I saw Elise through that glass wall. Part of it was shock. Part of it was the 19 years sitting in my chest like ballast, too heavy to just drop. But I think the larger part was something I'd learned a long time ago on the job. That the worst thing you can do in the middle of a fire is panic. Panic costs time. Panic costs judgment. And sometimes panic cost lives. I'm not saying I was calm. I wasn't. I sat in a parking garage for 20 minutes, unable to move. I cried in my basement. I spent nights staring at a ceiling, running the same mental loop until my eyes burned. None of that was calm. But I didn't act until I was ready. I didn't call her screaming. I didn't confront Preston. I didn't make a single move. I hadn't thought through. That, I think, is the difference between a reaction and a decision. What Elise did came from somewhere. I know that now. She watched Preston walk into her office 8 months before all of this. Someone new and confident who saw her in the way that people stop seeing each other after long enough. I understand the pull of that. I don't excuse it, but I understand it. She made a choice, and then she made it every day for months. And what those choices cost her wasn't just the marriage. It was the version of herself she'd been building since she was 22. The job. The reputation. The ground she'd worked for. You don't get to keep burning things down and walk away clean. Preston was gone within a month. The coast he'd come from took him back. He left Elise with the consequences and very few of the reasons she'd told herself it was worth it. That's usually how it goes when someone is willing to risk someone else's life for their own comfort. Their tolerance for consequence is much lower than their appetite for benefit. I spent a long time thinking about the man I was during those 19 years. I worked hard. I showed up for the kids. I loved her, genuinely, even when it was inconvenient. And I also let things go quiet between us in that gradual way that long marriages do. Not out of cruelty, but out of the comfort that can turn into carelessness if you stop paying attention. I'm not taking on her choices, but I can take on my own. What I learned is that self-respect is not something you can recover from someone else. Elise couldn't give it back to me. Preston losing his job didn't restore it. It came back the way it always does, slowly, through the accumulation of small decisions made with integrity. Calling the lawyer, talking to my kids before they heard it somewhere else, showing up for Sunday breakfast with my son even when I didn't feel like it, going to that fundraiser, calling Margot when I was finally ready instead of when I was just lonely. Margot said something on our wedding night that I've carried since. She said I show up for people. She meant it as a compliment, and I took it as one, but I also know it's only true because I finally, after everything, started showing up for myself first. And that's the whole education, I think. Not some lesson written on a wall, just the quiet, undramatic work of being honest, with the people around you and with the person you see in the mirror every morning. Do that long enough and the rest of it tends to sort itself out.